You're listening to Bible Truth Feed, a podcast by christadelphianvideo.org for Christadelphians and all those seeking the truth about the Bible message. Join us now as we present our latest episode. The Rise and Fall of Empires, the Bible told you so. Taken from Daniel chapter 8. Hello and welcome to Bible Truth Feed, a podcast by Christadelphian Video. So in this episode, key events throughout history have been foretold in the Bible. Overall, God has the destiny of nations in his control. He has a purpose with the earth and has generously given us an outline so that we can choose God's way or not. The great Greek Empire was absorbed by the Romans, who overthrew the Mosaic system of worship in Israel because of Israel's transgression.
I thought we'd go together through Daniel 8 and just see if we can start to pull out the structure of Daniel 8, and then that helps to build as we go from there with the talk for tonight. Now, our heading is The Rise of Empires, the Bible told you so, and if you've been to the last couple in this series, essentially the point of this is not just that the Bible's amazing at telling you historical events, but this is God telling us that he is in control. So let's always keep that in mind as we go through tonight. It's very easy for us to look at Bible prophecy, to look at the events unfolding and to say, yep, great, that's history, isn't it interesting? But the point of it is that hundreds, thousands of years in some cases before it occurs, God predicts with incredible accuracy what he is going to accomplish on the earth. And therefore, as we look at this subject tonight, we will find that God is in control. It tells us, the Bible told us it would happen, and it can only do that because God is in control. So what have we done for the last few sessions? We had a look at Daniel chapter 2, and Daniel chapter 7. Brother Glenn told me I wasn't allowed to go back and give a summation of the first section of Daniel, so I'll go through this very quickly. It is a little bit, sorry Glenn, but probably useful to set the context anyway. So Daniel 2, we've seen, was this image here on the left. That was the first session we looked at. And we saw that was about a succession of empires that would occur, from the Babylonian Empire to the Medo-Persian Empire to the Greek Empire to the Roman Empire, and through into our day, when eventually the Lord Jesus Christ would return and establish God's kingdom on the earth. And then last week, Caleb showed us that was also reflected in Daniel 7, essentially the same thing, but instead of showing it from man's perspective of a big, mighty warrior, it was beasts or animals. That was God's perspective on these different empires or kingdoms of men that would occur. And so we saw that the lion was Babylon, the bear was Persia, the leopard was Greece, and the dragon, or this fourth beast that was exceeding terrible so that it wasn't described, was the Roman Empire. And then that would then be divided out and have elements come out of it. So we saw some horns that were dropped out, and then a little horn that arose, and then we saw that eventually that became the power of the Holy Roman Empire and into the papacy as it spoke great things in a religious battle against God's people. And by this stage, the nation of Israel, having been cast out of their land, that the war was against not just the Jews, but against God's people, the believers who believed in God as well. So with that as a very quick context, let's come to Daniel chapter 8. And in Daniel chapter 8, we'll find that there's a number of similarities that we'll find tonight with Daniel chapter 7, but some quite significant differences as well. And I think picking up these similarities and differences as we go through is actually going to be quite key. So let's pick it up in Daniel 8 and verse 1. So in the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to Daniel. After that which had appeared to me at the first, I saw, and a vision came to pass when I was at Shushan in the palace which was in the province of Elam, and I saw in the vision I was by the river of Ulai. So can anyone tell me what's the key focus? This is sort of the intro. What's the key focus out of those first two verses? I'll leave it there with a picture of the little horn from Daniel 7. Anyone tell me the focus out of those first two verses? What's the idea that keeps coming up? I saw. Okay, there's a vision, isn't there? A vision appeared. I saw in a vision. I saw. And I saw in a vision. So it's an unusual emphasis. It's really emphasizing to us at the start of this chapter that this is a vision that Daniel's receiving. This is a picture. It's a vision that Daniel's receiving. Now keep that in the back of your mind, because as we go through, we'll find this concept of the vision keeps on coming through in this chapter as well. It is a vision, and we'll find later on it's a vision about something specific. And then he tells us about the vision, which goes from verse 13 through to verse, wherever it is, maybe I should pop that up and kids can take those notes down as we go. From verse 3 through to verse 14 is the vision. I've entitled it here, The Vision of the Ram and the He-Goat. So verse 3, he looked, and there was a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. And I saw the ram pushing west, north, south. No beast could stand before him. There was no one could deliver out of his hand. He became great, did whatever he wanted. And as he was looking at this great ram, thinking, wow, that's an impressive ram, a he-goat came from the west on the face of the earth and touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. So it's quite a telling picture, isn't it? It's quite a compelling picture that we're seeing. There's this great ram, and rams can be an incredibly powerful beast, and nothing can stand against that ram, this ram with 2 horns. And then he sees out of the west this he-goat come, and he's going so fast it looks like he's not touching the ground, and he's got this notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram which had 2 horns, which I had seen standing by the river, ran unto him in the fury of his power. I saw him come close to the ram. He was moved with choler against him and smote the ram, broke his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, stamped upon him. There was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. And therefore the he-goat waxed very great. So this is a picture of these 2 fighting. Now, I don't know if you've seen rams or goats fighting like this. I actually saw one a couple of weeks ago. I was at a place, and I could hear the noise before I saw them. There was some trees around, and you could just hear this sort of grunting from either of them, and then this boom, this concussion noise as the 2 of them just boom. And when I managed to actually find them, there were these 2 enormous rams standing there, panting away, puffing, and then they'd back off, and they'd just thud into each other, and literally their back legs would come off the ground as they said, and so they'd walk away dazed, a bit blood coming off their heads. They were just going completely hard at each other. They were just totally consumed with this desire to beat the other one. And that's the sort of picture that you've got here. There's these 2 enormous male animals who are going at each other for dominion. One wants control, and this he-goat here gets control over the ram. So he's got one notable horn, which is a bizarre thing in itself. You can imagine this goat with just the one horn, but you can see that he breaks the 2 horns of the ram, which means it's the power of the ram gone. The power or control of the ram gone, and therefore it can't stand before him. And then he waxes great, and he stamps upon him and kills the ram. And there's no one that can deliver him. Verse 8, the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken up, for it came up, read again. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, verse 8, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones towards the 4 winds of heaven. So you've got this he-goat, it's mighty, it's strong, nothing can stand against it, but at the pinnacle of its strength, this great horn breaks off, and 4 other horns come up which face out in different directions. And then verse 9, out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. So there's a little picture here of the ram and the he-goat. The ram being the one with the 2 horns for the kids, and the he-goat the one with the single notable horn. And so the picture tells us that single notable horn was broken off, 4 horns came up, and then out of one of the horns, so it's quite specific, remember that as well, out of one of the horns, another little horn came up, but that then waxed exceeding great towards the south, toward the east, towards the pleasant land. Waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground. It practiced and prospered. And so that's the picture we've got of this he-goat that has become exceedingly strong. The big horn is broken off, 4 come up in its place, and then out of that one horn comes up. And that one horn then waxes great, and it waxes great towards what's called the pleasant land, against the host of heaven, cast down some of that host, and magnified himself to the prince of the host, and took away a daily sacrifice, and the place of the sanctuary was cast down. And the host was given against him, against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. So already we're starting to get a few facts that might be starting to just gel in your mind in terms of what that could be. That this little horn now waxes exceeding great, and it's casting down a host, it's casting the sanctuary, it's taking away sacrifice because of transgression. Then verse 13, I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? So in his vision, he's seen all this in vision, and then he hears a voice from someone who's also been watching it, from one saint who's asking another saint, how long is this vision going to occur for? How long is the impact of this vision going to occur for? And he says, verse 14, unto 2,300 days, and then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. So that's the vision given to us. So if we come back to the structure of the book, context of the vision, then the vision through to verse 14 is given to us. And then in verse 15 through to verse 19, we find this surprising addition, which is verse 15. It came to pass when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, there stood before me as the appearance of a man. So someone stood before Daniel, looked like a man. So this is after the vision, looks like a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man, this Daniel, to understand the vision. So who's the man that's standing in front of him? Looks like a man. Who is it? Gabriel. Okay, and we know from elsewhere that Gabriel is one of God's angels, one of the archangels, a chief angel. So this is now one of God's angels standing before Daniel and saying, and he is told to make Daniel understand the vision. So he came near to where Daniel stood, and you can imagine when he does, Daniel's afraid, fell on his face, but Gabriel lifts him up. He says, understand, O son of man, at the time of the end shall be the vision. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face towards the ground, but he touched me and set me upright. So Gabriel, this section from verse 15 through to verse 19, is this interaction between Daniel and Gabriel. And Gabriel says, behold, I'll make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. And then, for most of the rest of the chapter, is Gabriel's explanation to Daniel about what the vision meant. So the vision's given verse 13 to 14. Daniel's trying to understand the vision. Gabriel appears to him, verse 15 to verse 19. And then from verse 20 through to verse 26 is Gabriel's explanation of that vision. And then in verse 27, after the explanation, Daniel fainted and was sick certain days, and then he got up and did the king's business. But he was astonished at the vision, and none understood it. And you can get this sense from verse 27 that Daniel was just churning over in his mind, astonished at it. The impact of it was so significant that it made him sick for a number of days. He couldn't do his work, and then eventually recovered enough to go in to do his work before the king, but he was still just churning over and over in his mind, trying to understand this vision. What does it mean? What's the implication of this vision? And we'll find out why as we dig into this vision in a bit more detail. So he tells them in verse 22, let's pick it up in verse 20. So this is Gabriel's explanation. The ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Okay, so now we have actually quite a level of detail here. I don't know if you can see that writing up there in dark. It's probably too dark, is it? But the goat is Grecian, the ram is Medo-Persian, and the big horn is Alexander the Great, or it's the first king of the Grecian Empire, we're told. So we don't even need to try and work out who these are. We're told emphatically by Gabriel that the he-goat is the Greeks, the ram is the Medes and Persians, and the big horn that came out from the goat was actually the first king of the Greeks, which we know is Alexander the Great, an incredible general, which we'll touch on in a moment as well. Now that's really helpful because it gives us, or sets us in the context, doesn't it? If we come back to this one here, it tells us that this is the same time as the Persian bear and the Grecian leopard. It's the interplay between those, or the transition between those two. And likewise with the chest and arms of silver and the belly and thighs of brass is the first point that this is talking about. This is the Medes and Persians being overthrown by the Greeks, is what we're told. Now we won't go into the rest of the detail in this section just now. Let's just come back for a moment and have a look at a couple of bits of detail here that are quite interesting as well. So in verse 3, we're told that the ram had 2 horns, and the horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. Now that's quite specific detail, isn't it? Now you may recall, if you were here at Caleb's session last time, can anyone recall how that would connect back to Daniel 7? In Daniel 7, so remember this is the ram we're told is the Medes and Persians. Just come back and have a look in Daniel 7, where the bear is the Medes and Persians. Daniel 7 verse 5, behold another beast, a second like to a bear, and it raised itself up on one side. So there's the same sort of message here, isn't it? It's lopsided. And so this is the same idea that comes out from Daniel chapter 8. It's got 2 horns, it's got 2 powers representing kings, but one is higher than the other. And we know that was the case. I think Caleb talked about it, and possibly it was touched on in Daniel 2 as well, that the Medes and Persians were a joining together of the Medes and the Persians, funny enough, and that the Medes, whilst commencing, were then essentially replaced by, or not as strong as the Persians, who really took control of the empire of the Medes and Persians, and it really became the Persian Empire. So minute little detail that's been given to us in this prophecy before the Medes and Persians had arisen. This was in the time of Belshazzar, so the Babylonians are still the power. That was a prediction that when the Medes and Persians came to power, the Medes would be strong but then be overtaken by the Persians as the strength of their kingdom. And that's just a little example of the amount of incredible detail that we'll find in this prophecy as we go through. And the point being, again, it's telling us that God's the one in control here. He's not just looking into the future and being able to see what will happen. He's the one who's actually bringing it to pass. That's why he can predict the future. Not just that he can foretell the future, but he makes the future happen, is the point here. Okay, so then you saw the ram pushing west, north and southward, and that's exactly what the Medes and Persians did. They just expanded their empire out around so that no beast could stand before, etc., etc. Then we come to the story of Alexander the Great. So the Greeks are starting to grow in power. Philip of Macedon, up in the area of Macedonia, starts to become more powerful. And when he dies, his son Alexander the Third of Macedon takes over. Now he became known as Alexander the Great. Alexander was just 20 years old when he came to power, and I think it was about 336 BC that he came to power. So he was just a 20-year-old, but he very quickly overran the whole area of Macedonia, in essence took control of the area of Macedonia, and then started to conquer the rest of the world. So this little map here has this little yellow bit here was what Alexander inherited, just this tiny little area through in Macedonia. And eventually, by 12 years later, so he was in his early 30s, he had expanded the empire out enormously, right out over here to the edge of the Indus, and actually crossed the Indus and conquered a part of India as well, right down into Egypt and top of Africa. He expanded the empire enormously and took over the area of the Medes and Persians also. So he was undefeated in battle. That's quite incredible. And as a result is known as perhaps the greatest and most successful military commander of all time. Because all the other great military commanders actually at some stage eventually had reverses. So he was still very young, 33. He had essentially pushed right out to the edge of India and had conquered a small part of India as well. But he was faced with potential revolt from his troops who've said enough's enough. We've been on the go for 10 years. We want to go home and have some of Mum's cooking. And so he eventually agreed and headed back. And we're told that he really struggled with the fact that he didn't have any more lands to conquer. He was devastated by the fact that he had no more lands to conquer. He'd pushed out essentially as far as he could. Now he died. There's various sort of suggestions as to how he died, but I think all of them seem to agree that it was because he in essence came to a point where he was just too focused on the fact that he had no more areas he could conquer, that he threw himself into a fairly debauched life, and he died unexpectedly without having accomplished all that he intended to do. Now when he died, he had no successors, so he had no sons, therefore no successors, and so it led to this time of incredible conflict throughout the Grecian Empire at the time. Now there was a group of people who were known as the Diadochi. You might have heard of the Diadochis. So the Diadochis were essentially those people who were the generals and his family and friends who, after he died, became rivals and who would control the empire after his death in 323 BC. And there were, out of all those sort of Diadochis who were rivals who were trying to take over control of the empire, there were four who emerged with real power. So there was Ptolemy, Antigonus, Cassander, and Seleucus, who then went through with all the wars and fighting amongst each other, and essentially settled down in the end to their four different empires. So here's the great empire of the Grecians under Alexander the Great, and it's now been divided up into these different areas here. You may not be able to see it so well, but down here, Egypt is the Ptolemies. You've got the Seleucids out to your right here, and then Thrace and Macedonia and Greece up in here. What's astonishing about that is that that is a perfect fulfillment of the one notable horn being broken, and in its place 4 horns coming up. So again, incredible, minute detail that's being told us about what would happen to this empire of the Greeks, and the fact that Alexander would die. When he was in the middle of his power, in the greatest extent of his power, then he would die, and in his place these four kingdoms would emerge in his place. So then what would we be looking for after that, based on this prophecy? What's that, Anjabula? We'd be looking for, out of one of the horns, another little horn to emerge. Yeah. So interestingly, and this is, so Daniel 8 is a summation of what happens from a Grecian perspective. Daniel 8 is then picked up and expanded in Daniel 11. Now, we're not going to look at Daniel 11 tonight, you'll be pleased to know, Glenn, otherwise it would be a very late night. But there is a lot of language that's very similar between Daniel 11 and Daniel 8. But what Daniel 11 does is it hones in on from these four empires that emerged, or four kingdoms that emerged, two of them were not to say irrelevant, but in essence there became a major conflict between two groups, being the Ptolemies, who were ruling in Egypt, one of them more well known being Cleopatra was a Ptolemy, and the Seleucids, who were up in that sort of Syrian area as well. And so there was this battle between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. Now what it does is, in Daniel 11 goes through and tells us the history, and if we think the detail in Daniel 8 is amazing, in Daniel 11 it is incredible, minute detail of exactly what would happen that is fulfilled perfectly in between the battle between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. But what it's telling us also is that the perspective that Daniel takes in Daniel 8 and in Daniel 11 is around the impact on the land of Israel, on God's land, on God's people, on God's land. And so in Daniel 11 it's positioned as the king of the north and the king of the south, the Seleucids who were north of Israel, the Ptolemies who were south of Israel, and the battle that would occur. And essentially those battles kept on occurring whereabouts? Over the land of Israel. They kept on pushing them in and pushing them out, and one would push at them and then the other would push at them. And we find that Daniel 11 takes us through this battle that would occur between these two groups and then stops for a period of time. And then Daniel 11, as we know, picks up again in the future with Gog, with Russia as the king of the north, who would come down and push against the king of the south, Egypt, and then go back up into Jerusalem when tidings came that would cause him to go back up in fury as well. And so what Daniel 11 is showing us, that this battle that's occurring, this issue that's occurring here, is one that would essentially die down for a while, but would be manifest later on at the time of the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. And this is exactly what we find here in Daniel 8 as well. But what Daniel 8 is doing, rather than showing the conflict between those two, is to show that one of those would become one of those empires, being the Seleucids. From out of them would have another horn arise that would eventually have power over the land of Israel and cause certain events to occur upon the land of Israel. That's essentially the message of Daniel 8. So Daniel 8's focus is upon the land of Israel, and there's another focus as well that we'll come to in a little moment as well. But keep that in your mind. What Daniel 8 is saying is there's this battle between these two empires is all leading towards a power that would come out of one of the four horns that would have an impact upon the people of Israel and upon the land of Israel. Now, one of the Seleucids was a man named Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who reigned over the Seleucid Empire from 175 BC until his death in 164 BC. He was originally known as Mithridates. You may have heard of the chap Mithridates, who became Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, we won't go through the detail of it, but essentially Antiochus had control over the land of Israel, controlled the land of Israel, and then he ended up in excessive tension with the Jewish people. And he got to the point where he was so sick of the Jewish people and their rebellions against him that he decided he would show them who was boss. And so he moved in, put his troops into the temple, and offered a pig on the altar in the temple. So completely desecrated the temple and the altar, and required or forced Jewish people to worship his gods. So you can imagine, from a Jewish perspective, being forced to do this sort of thing was just incredibly, one thing they couldn't accept it, and there was just an incredible hatred that arose, which actually led to the Jewish revolt under the Maccabees. So you may have heard of the Maccabees, that essentially, whilst it had been bubbling away before, it were brought to a head by the actions of Antiochus Epiphanes, and the Maccabean revolt occurred. And what was interesting was that the Maccabees ended up taking control of much of the land of Israel. They took back Jerusalem. and took over control of much of the land of Israel. And so this led for a while to essentially the Jews having a form of independence. Not long after that, I think it was 163 BC, you find that I'll just show you this map here. So this is Antiochus Epiphanes here. Here's a picture of the pig. I'm not sure that is the pig that was offered on the altar. But here's his empire out here, and you can see the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemies down to the bottom. But can you see, if you can read it, what's interesting about that map? Can you see just in here, and for those of you online, you might be able to see it, that I'm pointing to. I'm pointing to the light red there. That's the Romans who are starting to rise. So the Roman Empire has been starting to grow, push out of Italy and Rome, and they're starting to push out their borders now and to take on some of the Seleucid Empire as well. And about this time, the Maccabees actually ended up having a treaty with Rome that basically, it was very similar to the NATO treaty. Actually, it said if you're attacked, we'll fight for you, and we promise we won't work with any of your enemies. So that created this sort of relationship between the Maccabees and the Romans. And what we find is over time, that led to the Romans being invited in to assist the Jews in their battles, and the Romans were quite happy to come and give a hand. Their troops arrived in Israel, in Judah, and never left. And what happened over that time eventually, so the growth of the Roman Empire eventually took over the Seleucid Empire, and it was about 63 BC that the Romans eventually overthrew the Seleucid Empire and took over the Seleucid Empire. So what we see in terms of the history that's occurring is that the Roman Empire becomes this little horn that arises out of the Seleucid horn of the four horns. So you've got the Medo-Persian Empire. It gets overthrown by the Grecian Empire, particularly under Alexander the Great. When he dies, the empire splits into four, major ones being the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. Out of the Seleucid Empire, the Romans start to grow, and particularly the Romans with their influence over the nation or the land of Israel. And so again, we find this incredible way in which Scripture is fulfilled here by the events that have occurred, shown by history. Now, I want to just pause for a moment then and say, well, that's interesting, but this starts to get confusing, doesn't it? Because up until now, it's nice and neat. You've got the Medes and Persians, which were like the chest and arms of silver, or the bear. You've got the Grecians, who were like the belly and thighs of brass, or the leopard. But now, under Daniel 8, you've got the Roman power emerging out of what? Well, it's no longer the fourth beast of Daniel 7. It's actually a horn associated with the Greek, with the he-goat of the Greeks. So it raises a question then: is Daniel 8 different to Daniel 7? And if so, what are the differences? Well, the first thing we note is that both beasts have a little horn that arises. The fourth beast of Daniel 7 has a little horn that arises. And likewise in Daniel 8 here, we saw that out of one of the horns, a little horn arose. But but in this chapter, there are only two empires that are clashing. It's the Medes and Persians and the Greeks. That the little horn arises from the Grecian beast, not the Roman beast or not the fourth beast of Daniel 7. And particularly that each of those little horns have very different characteristics. So what were the characteristics of the little horn in Daniel 7? It had eyes and a mouth that was speaking great things. So one of the main characteristics of the little horn out of Daniel 7, Daniel 7, was that it was one that would speak things, words. Eyes, it would take things in, and then it would be uttering things. Yeah, and then we found that would go on and make war with the saints. But in Daniel 8, we find this little horn is associated with the Grecian Empire, comes out of the Grecian Empire. And what's the characteristics of the little horn out of Daniel 8? Well, it waxed great against the armies of heaven, cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them, magnified himself against the prince of the host. What's the characteristics of this one? It's a military power, isn't it? It's belligerent. He's out there fighting. And so these two actually end up becoming, whilst they are both, you could confuse the two of them, actually in the end, those two little horns are actually quite different things. As we saw last time, the little horn out of Daniel 7 represents the Catholic system that would arise and become a religious war that would occur against God's people, and particularly by that stage, post the Roman beast, by that stage Israel having been taken out of the land, it becomes a religious war against the people of God, against the saints of God. Daniel 8 is a belligerent manifestation of the Roman power that is particularly focused on its impact on the land of Israel and the people of Israel, as we shall find now. So let's just have a look. So there are certainly elements to it. Interestingly, it is actually picked up here, so let's just cover it. Interestingly, in Daniel 7, you'll see that fourth beast has claws of brass. So there is a connection even in Daniel 7 with the Grecian Empire, or the brass of the Greeks, the strength of the Greeks. And I think what it's doing is it's showing us that the Grecian Empire, the symbol here of the Grecian Empire in Daniel 8 is around its military power. And so this beast, Brother Thomas calls it in exposition of Daniel, and by the way, a lot of what I'm talking about tonight is from here, so an unabashed encouragement for you to get in to read that to get more detail. It's quite phenomenal, the level of detail that's there. But he calls it the Babylonian Greco-Roman horn. So his point being, he's saying there's actually connections of ideas from Babylon with the Grecian influence or impact on it manifested in the Roman power. And the particular power or influence that's being impacted, funny enough, isn't the Greek philosophy or Greek thought, it's the Greek military power. It's the Greek horn. It's Alexander the Great's influence, you could say, is the key. Now that is really interesting. Sorry, I'm going off track a little bit here, and perhaps a little bit more detail we can discuss later. But just to throw to a side here, you'll also hear Brother Thomas constantly talk about the Assyrio-Babylonian Empire, and it can be a bit sort of, why is that? The focus was Assyria, then it becomes Babylon. What he's doing is he's calling out that there's two components. One is the military power of Assyria. The other is the spiritual power of Babylon, the spiritual battle of Babylon. And here in Daniel 8, it's the military power particularly that's being picked up. And that makes sense, because when it's expanded into Daniel 11 and becomes the king of the north, king of the south, the king of the north is who? Russia, Gog. It's the military power that is destroyed at Armageddon. And then you get the religious battle that occurs post-Armageddon of 40 years, where Europe is destroyed and the Catholic system brought to its knees. And so there's that religious versus spiritual battle, or military versus religious battle that occurs, and both elements of these being involved in the kingdoms of men. Yeah, so the Hellenization of the world, the Greek thinking that occurred, was then picked up on the Roman side. Now the level, again, there's layers in here which are just quite phenomenal and really quite powerful. So setting all of that as the scene, can we just come to a surprising focus on this vision? So we talked about in verse 1 and 2 the fact that the emphasis on the vision, and then it comes up verse 13, how long the vision, verse 15, Daniel had seen the vision, verse 16, the vision, verse 17, the vision. Have a look in verse 26. So this is Gabriel finishing off his summation or his explanation to Daniel, and he says, "The vision of the evening and morning which was told is true. Wherefore shut up the vision, for it shall be for many days." What's he just said? He's just called this vision the vision of the evening morning. Why has he done that? This is the vision of the he-goat and the ram, isn't it? Isn't it about what would happen to the Medes and Persians and Greeks, and how that would flow into the Seleucids and down into Rome? No, from God's perspective, from Gabriel's perspective, this is a vision that is about the evening and the morning. What does that mean? Verse 13, we get a bit more. Verse 13, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily and the transgression? You'll see sacrifice there is in italics, so it's not in the original. Concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation. Verse 12, an host was given him against the daily by reason of transgression. So this vision of the evening morning is what? Well, the evening morning here is a phrase that's used elsewhere in Scripture to define the continual burnt offering. And the daily sacrifice, the actual word daily there, is the word continual. It's the word that's used of the continual burnt offering. So actually, from God's perspective, he says this is a vision about what's going to happen to the continual burnt offering in Israel that occurred in the evening. One was put on the burnt off altar on the evening, and then another one would occur and was put on the altar. Another sacrificial burnt offering was put on the altar in the morning, so that it would continually be in place. So actually, all of a sudden, this vision changes from a nice sense of what would happen across the empires to God telling us this is a vision about what would happen to the Mosaic era in Israel. The evening morning sacrifice, the continual burnt offering, represents the Mosaic constitution, as it were, the nation of Israel existing under the law of Moses in the land. And actually we find that this whole vision is about Daniel being told that the Mosaic era, the Mosaic constitution, Israel living under the law of Moses, would be taken away. And he's told, why would that occur? Verse 11. Well, this little horn's magnified himself against the prince of the host. Verse 10. It waxed great. Previous verse 9. It waxed towards the pleasant land. That's the land of Israel. It waxed great even to the host of heaven. That's the armies of heaven. And we haven't got time to go through now, but is essentially representing Israel as God's people, as God's army. So it's waxing against the army of Israel. It's cast some of Israel's army down to the ground, and the stars, some of Israel's rulers, down to the ground, and stamped upon them. He magnified himself to the prince of the host against the Lord Jesus Christ, because that's what the Romans did. They crucified Christ. And by him, the continual burnt offering was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Okay, now this is an incredible prophecy about the overthrow of the Jewish system under the Romans. So it's not just about a flow of empires. This is about God saying, this is the impact on my people and what's going to happen to my people. Now see why that occurs. Verse 12. And host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. So Daniel's being told that the overthrow of the Mosaic system in Israel and their subjugation under what was to be this Roman system would occur because of the transgressions of his people. Now you think about Daniel. He's in captivity because of transgression in Israel. And he's told it's all right, you're going to come back. He knows the prophecies, Jeremiah, 70 years, you're going to come back to the land. Now he knows it's going to happen all over again. There's going to be more transgression. And in fact, something's going to happen to the Prince of the host, to the Lord Jesus Christ. And then they're going to be cast out of their land again. And so we find that this is actually a prophecy that becomes very, very emotional for Daniel. It's a prophecy that becomes, and that's what we see in verse 27. I, Daniel, fainted and was sick 7 days. He looks at it, he just, I can't believe that this is going to happen again. And then he eventually got up to do his work, but he was just astonished at the vision. It's going round and round and round inside his head. So what's his response to that? Well, interestingly, Daniel 9 occurs some 15 years after Daniel 8 from the time frames that were given. In verse 2 of Daniel 9, he understood by books the number of the years that God had prophesied through Jeremiah that it would be 70 years. And he says, 68 years, 2 more years, and we'll be able to go back to the land. So he starts to give supplication to God, to pray to God by prayer and supplication with fasting and sackcloth and ashes, and gives one of the most incredible prayers of intercession on behalf of his people that occurs in Scripture. You know this prayer beautifully, but he acknowledges his own sin. He acknowledges the sin of the people of Israel, but encapsulates himself in that sin. And he pleads on God, on the strength of God's character, that he will restore his people. And I believe that this is in response not just to his understanding of the 70 years, but 15 years later is his response to the vision of Daniel chapter 8. And do you know why I can say that? If you've read ahead on my slides, you'll have a wee look. Have a look here in verse 21. What's God's response? While I was speaking, while I was praying, someone appeared to me, even the man Gabriel, verse 21, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning. What vision is that? Well, there is no vision in Daniel 9. It's a vision from somewhere else. Which vision is it? Well, it's the vision of Daniel 8. Gabriel comes to him, which connects Daniel 9 to the vision of Daniel 8. Whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. Perfect timing, isn't it? This is the vision of the evening and morning in Daniel 8. And here he is pleading. Daniel's pleading and pleading. And as it leads up to the evening oblation, Gabriel appears to talk to him about the broader impact of that vision of the evening oblation. Verse 22, O Daniel, I am come forth to give thee skill and understanding. At the beginning of thy supplications the command came forth, I am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved, therefore understand the matter and consider the vision. And then he gives the 70 weeks prophecy, which fills out the bit between. So it's between when they go back and when Messiah occurs, will be this time period, and then he'll be cut off, and then the people will be cast out, and then they'll be restored again. So Daniel 9 is actually an extension of Daniel 8. And Daniel 11 is an extension of Daniel 8 in its detail as well. I haven't got time to go through that in any more detail, but happy to talk about that afterwards. I haven't also got time to go back to Deuteronomy 28, but you'll find that a lot of language in Deuteronomy 28 is picked up in Daniel 9 and picked up in Daniel chapter 8. And I think what it's telling us is Deuteronomy 28 was the original prophecy that was given of Israel's demise. That they would have these cursings that would occur, and actually some quite phenomenal chronological prophecies that would show about the coming of the Romans. The nation would come upon them as swift as the eagle flieth, whose language they would not understand. A nation of fierce countenance. Well, you have a look at Daniel 8 verse 23. In the latter end, when the transgressions are come to a full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences. So that's a direct connection back to Deuteronomy 28. And so on and so on. And then you think about it. Brother Thomas pulls this out beautifully, so again I encourage you to have a look there. But you think about, he says, and shows quite powerfully, that verse 13, when it talks about the transgressions, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation? And when it calls the vision of the evening and morning, what it's saying is, when the Romans came in and overthrew the evening and morning sacrifice, the continual burnt offering, that Israel themselves became the continual burnt offering. That they became the morning and the evening and morning sacrifice that would occur. And for a period of 2,300 days, as it says here, this evening morning sacrifice, it's not the time period doesn't link to that, but this time period of Israel taking on the continual burnt offering, of being the evening and morning sacrifice, would occur for a period of time until eventually they were restored. And again, that ties into Deuteronomy 28. Your life will hang in doubt before you. In the morning you'll say, would God it were night. In the evening you'll say, would God it were morning. There's a sense of just this continual evening and morning sacrifice that Israel themselves would become. It's horrific, it's terrifying, but it shows the power of what God was doing here in Daniel 8 as well. And so it's no wonder, is it, that Daniel was sick certain days and afterward was astonished. So what's the point of all of this then? Well, it tells us that God is in complete control. It tells us that he has set up the kingdoms of men. Empire after empire has been set up by him, extended by him, and removed by him. But underlying it all is not actually God's focus on the kingdom of men, but on its impact on his people and how they interact with him. He uses the kingdom of men to develop, to protect, or to judge his people as he requires and according to their response to them. But in the end, his ways are perfect, his character is perfect, and he will accomplish his purpose with this nation and draw them back again. And so you see in the end of verse 25, he shall stand up. This little Roman horn would stand up against the Prince of Princes. And in its entirety, this is when the Northern Confederacy, this military power extended through of the Roman influence into Russia and to Gog. This military power comes down to stand against the Prince of Princes, with us, God willing, as princes at his feet. And at that time, that little horn will be broken without hand, and God's kingdom established upon the earth.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you found the episode helpful. Don't forget, most of these episodes are also available as videos on our video channel, cdvideo.org. So head over and take a look. If you have any comments or questions or suggestions, please get in touch or leave us a voice message. We love to hear your feedback. You can email us at btf@cdvideo.org. If you enjoyed the episode, then please share it with others. Until next time, may God bless you in your studies and your walk towards God's kingdom. Amen.